Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Thursday, August 18th. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris. On this episode, we are fishing for pitching. We're going to look at some currently overlooked starters with some long-term potential. We're going to try and find some of the members of the next crop of elite relievers, and we'll take a look at some current relievers who could be future starters. So tons of pitching stuff mashed into one episode ahead of the weekend. How's it going for you on this Thursday,
Good. I'm propping my eyes open. It was another crazy night at Casa Reyes Ceres. Dogs and children and pandemonium.
What's the next pet that you are going to get as a family? Have you decided yet?
It won't be a chinchilla. They're messy and require a lot of attention, and so it will not be one. I have been I have a follow the Weed Detective on Twitter that has a large turtle, and the turtle seems to actually interact well with his cat. We have cats. There's a picture he had recently of a cat on top of the turtle, large turtle. And
Yeah.
I know from the neighborhood there's a turtle that my dogs are not threatened by it and have no capacity, like just don't understand it. So we could have a turtle and they wouldn't be barking at the turtle all the time. Probably because they move so slow. So the dogs are like, that's just a rock.
That's a rock. Yeah, it's a rock. And the wind pushed that rock.
Yeah.
If turtles were more like plastic bags, dogs would hate turtles. Because dogs hate plastic bags.
Yeah, anything that moves unexpectedly,
Yeah, I just figured something that would go in a tank or a clear box was probably the next move, because then you could contain it to one part of your home.
We have a fair amount of tanked. We have a lot of fish. So
That's
I
right,
guess
you have fish.
we could have. Yeah, that would be the other thing is, like an axolotl.
I have thought you do have.
Our cousins have an axolotl.
I only see that come up on Google Sheets. Anonymous axolotl. It's like, oh, okay. I don't even know what that animal is, so
look that up.
I'm gonna have to Google that one. Thanks for that. But no, it is. It's like a farm environment, but it's not a farm. You have the chaos of a farm, but you have like
None of the
more of like an
products.
oasis setting otherwise. Yes, you don't have the big plot of land. You don't have a tractor. You don't have an outbuilding. You don't have those.
Oh, we
things.
could get chickens. We're allowed to have chickens in our city, and there are chickens on our block. And I would love to have eggs. I do not love chickens though. They're loud, stinky, and any area you let them go around in, they just sort of poop around it.
Yeah, I would say the chickens with dogs probably not the best combo.
Yeah, we'd have to sort of fence off a whole area.
Love the idea for a turtle. If you have an idea
eggs.
for what Eno should name the family turtle once they have one, send those our way. ratesandbarrels@theathletic.com. Fishing for pitching, though. Let's talk about some currently overlooked starters with long-term potential. There are some days, there are busy days on my schedule. Thursdays are kind of busy. I record 3 shows now on Thursdays. And when you have a piece come out on a Thursday, it's just like I won the lottery, because there's automatically a lot of stuff we can talk about, and I don't have to be quite as creative as if you didn't have a piece come out that day. Now we share the load. We come up with ideas for the show all the time, but this is a great piece because you took a look at some starters who had stuff plus increases from last year to this year, and you kind of dug into where those increases came from. And I think that's really important, because a lot of times I think people think about pitchers changing and we immediately assume more velo. More velo is good. More velo is the way. And that's true. More velo is good. But a lot of times pitchers are maxed out. They've already pushed that button. They've already emptied that tank. They've already gone through that training. They've already switched to weighted balls. They've already done all the things they could do to maximize efficiency and sort of top out with velo. But there are other ways to move that number. And that seems to be the more common way that stuff plus increases have happened from last year to this year.
Yeah, because we're looking at major league players. Sometimes we forget that, we're looking at a young player, they could change. Well, even a young player has spent 3, 4, 5 years in the minor leagues, right? So they've gone to gas camp, and they know what driveline is. They've either decided to do it or not. They know what the weighted ball programs are. So most of them have done it, and there isn't that much more to be gained out of their velo. And if you look at aging curves, mostly velo just goes away over time. So when I looked at the 25 biggest Stuff Plus risers from last year to this year, that includes I have them ranked by the Stuff Plus difference. So I'll just list like in the first 5 or 6 or something. Jacob Junis is number 1, and right away you should be that's a hint towards how to improve your stuff. Kyle Wright, number 2, Chris Archer, Christian Javier, Shohei Ohtani, Mitch Keller, Tyler McGill. So those are the biggest risers, and most of them are having good seasons, especially compared to their previous track records. And of that group, only 52%, so only 13 of them improved their velocity by at least 0.75 miles per hour. And in fact, that number gets lower if I remove some of the guys returning from injury, like Chris Sale, Chris Archer, and Noah Syndergaard. I think I had another example. I forget who it was. But if you remove the guys coming back from injury, that number drops below 50%. So that is not actually the best way to improve your stuff. 73% of them, so almost 3/4 of them, improve the shapes on one or more of their pitches by more than 1 inch. So that is a real way forward. And then here's the biggest number. 88% of them, I think all but 3 of them, changed their pitch mix. And in order to say that they changed their pitch mix, I said 5%. So it was like a pretty high bar to say change their pitch mix when I was going through. And all of them but 3 had a major change to their pitch mix. That's why I said Jake Junis was a large hint, because he just threw the slider a lot more. And I think that's the easiest way to look for future breakouts. It's the easiest way for teams to think about, hey, let's acquire this guy and just really up the changeup usage, the slider usage, whatever it is. And so I think that that was the sort of prism that I looked through the different pitchers that people asked me to look at, in that piece.
So just looking at Junis for a minute, 7 innings last time out, 7 strikeouts, 1 earned run on 4 hits. He had a run of 5 appearances where he didn't even get into the 5th inning more than once. And it looked like it was kind of like the wheels were falling off. The league had sort of adjusted and figured him out. I think there is something here with Junis, and maybe Chris Archer kind of fits into this group too. There's still, even with improvements and stuff, some limitations on guys that don't necessarily have that deep arsenal. And then I think it's also hard to utilize these players in our fantasy leagues because we don't typically trust them to have that workload. With Junis, it was strange because when he first came up, he was working out of the pen in long relief. So he had a couple of 5-inning relief appearances. Then they worked him as a starter for a while. He went 5+, I think, in 4 consecutive starts. Got sent down for a little while, came back up, had that bad run we just described. Like,
there was an injury.
Oh, that's right. He got hurt. Yeah, he got hurt in there too.
I think the June to July missing data there is injury, because he had a hamstring injury. And then when he came back, he was he wasn't fully stretched out, but they needed him. So they activated him before he was fully stretched out. And since that, he's been under 5. He was under 5 innings for like 5-6 consecutive starts. So I don't know. I have talked to him a fair amount, and he said the hamstring felt fine. But there is that sort of interaction between injury and how stretched out he was. Plus, yeah, maybe the league being like, okay, he throws the slider a lot more. But I mean, underrated. He does throw the changeup a lot. It's not an amazing pitch by any means, and he hasn't actually changed the shape on it. But I think just to offset what you're saying, He's thrown this pitch that has an 81 stuff plus, but 105 location and ends up being a 97 pitching plus pitch. So he's throwing a slightly below average pitch just to keep them off of the slider and the sinker.
Yeah. Oh, and it was an option in late April, and then it was that hamstring injury that cost him that time from the middle of June until the middle part of July. So I think he's pretty interesting just because he ended up in a pitcher-friendly environment in an organization that has a pretty good recent track record of finding overlooked pitchers. So they're definitely in that group of teams where they take a flyer on somebody, you want to pay attention and kind of see what might be different. That's to me, we have this new reason to care about spring training. It's just sort of like looking in really granular ways at what a pitcher might be doing differently that led him to a new team. Like, why did this team take a flyer on this guy? Like that's a question that we can now answer.
Yeah, I think in Junis' case, they were like, hey, he has an elite slider by our stuff plus numbers, basically, and we think he can throw it more. I think fantasy managers can act accordingly. It's just the toggle between how good the group of pitches is and how elite, the toggle between how elite the one good pitch is and then how wide the pitch mix is around it, I think is almost feel still, because Junis has this elite slider, and so does Kyle Bradish, right? So, and Kyle Bradish throws the slider about half as much as he throws the four-seam fastball. So, could you tell Kyle Bradish throw that slider exactly as much as you throw your four-seam fastball? And would that lead to a breakout? Well, Kyle Bradish's four-seam fastball has 83 stuff plus, 98 location, 96 pitching. That's worse than Junis's fastball, his sinker. So, will it work or will it not? I kind of see possibly a reliever out of Kyle Bradish, just because the changeup is low stuff, good locations. I don't think that's good enough for a changeup. The curveball is low stuff, mediocre locations. It has been popping a little bit and been looking a little bit recent. But how many other pitchers do you know that establish with the slider, throw a curveball off the slider, and then throw the four seam? Rarely. It's not who does that remind you of anybody?
Not offhand. No, that's a very unusual approach.
I think that would be pretty unusual. It seems to me like a reliever. Now, put that up against Mitch White. Mitch White's slider is not as elite by itself, but it is his best pitch. Now he's got a changeup that rates as above average with sort of average stuff, average location. His four seam, he locates it a little bit better. And he throws 5 pitches right now. So it's 5 chances to alter his mix and change, tweak the movement, right? So I'm more bullish on Mitch White becoming a good starting pitcher in the future than I am Kyle Bradish. There's more chances for success, even if his elite pitch is lesser than Kyle Bradish's.
So there was a question that came in from OJ. OJ writes, every year there seems to be a few guys who successfully transition from the bullpen to the rotation. Tyler Wells, Aaron Ashby, Michael Kopech, Drew Rasmussen among them from this year. Is there a way we can use the pitching model to make some educated guesses about who could do it next year? I mean, that's kind of what we're getting at here. I assume it would be guys who don't just pop in stuff, but also in command, figure guys who are full-time closers, are there permanently, even if they were starters recently. So that would cover someone like Jorge Lopez, and maybe even the high leverage guy like Yohan Duran is unlikely to move as well. A few candidates he threw at us: Adrian Morejon, Griffin Jacks, Ronaldo Lopez, all recent starters who don't close, maybe aren't even 8th inning guys. Seems like you'd maximize their value if you could return them to starting roles. So any legs to this theory as far as the way front offices act and the numbers work, or any other guys we should add on the off chance of a move like this? I think Jax is kind of an interesting name because I think there's some similarities between Jax and Junis, but I think Jax actually throws a little harder too. With the bullpen role, he's pushing that slider more. I know the model loved his slider last year, And the concern was, well, the other pitches don't really grade out that well as a starter, but there are two other pitches. There's still a changeup, and there's still even a curveball that he's throwing 5% of the time as a reliever. He threw it a little more as a starter in the past. So that would kind of give you the extra outs, the multiple paths to figuring something out during an off season if you can change the shape or change something about the characteristics of those pitches to make them more effective.
It's true, and the model even liked him last year as a starter when nobody else did. I guess it is possible. The one thing that stands out for me is that with the added velo boost of going to the pen, his fastball is a 102 stuff plus. So whatever you think of him now, you have to appraise how good you think he'll be when his four-seam fastball is a 95 stuff plus or 98, because it's going to go down. And then all of his other pitches will be defined off of that. And so that's why generally stuff goes down the more you pitch, because your fastball stuff is going down and your pitches are all defined off of that. So that's something you have to think about, is that, look at even Spencer Strider, right? He was, in Felix Bautista territory as a reliever, and he's still, maybe the best starting pitcher by stuff plus, but the difference between Felix Bautista and the best starting pitcher is about 30 points of stuff plus.
That's a pretty big difference.
Right. So if Jax, if Jax loses 5 or 6 points of stuff plus, he could be a viable starter. If he loses more, then he, I think he falls out. The one thing that I don't like about the Jax call, even though I see it in the mix, is he was a starter and became a reliever. A lot of in terms of in the major leagues, right? So he kind of had his chance, quote unquote. When I think of Tyler Wells, that was a guy who was a starter in the minor leagues who came on as a reliever and then went back to starting. I think that's a slightly different pathway. So I'm a little bit more pessimistic about someone who has started in the major leagues, like Reynaldo Lopez as well, and a team decided, no, you're a reliever.
Yeah,
There are some guys who go back and forth who have done that, but I think it's a little bit more rare.
It almost seems like you need a team change. If a major league team had you as a starter and decided to use you as a reliever,
yeah,
you have to go somewhere else for a new set of evaluators to say, no, you're a starter. We believe that. With Jax, the other thing that's pretty interesting, the changeup is totally different. That was an 85.6 mile an hour changeup last year. He's throwing it at 89.5 this year. I mean, it's got to be a different grip, different movement profile. There's almost no way that that's the same pitch, right? That's not the kind of thing you see with the move to the bullpen. Oh yeah, he's throwing his changeup harder. It's not really the goal. And maybe you're trying to keep a nice delta between the fastball and the changeup, but is that a much better pitch? Better by results, at least to this point. He only throws it 13% of the time, but that would be the other thing that could have changed.
Yeah, it's true. It's a 105 stuff plus changeup now. And so he's got the elite slider, which he always had. He's got the curveball is above average by stuff plus, not by location. So maybe he struggles to locate that. And that's meaningful too. But even if you take the curveball out, he has good locations on 3 pitches and he has above average stuff on 3 pitches. I mean, yes, that is something I would look for. I would look for above average locations on pitches and above average. You know what I got to do? I got to put the by pitch leaderboard up on the Google Doc. I'll do that for people. Just don't look at Ohtani's sinker. It's we're testing right now a version of the Stuff Plus model that includes some of 2022 data in its training, which we hadn't had before, right? When you make a model, you always have to train it on some data and then test it on other data. And so, we can now include some of 2022 data in the training. And then the second part is it decides what the primary fastball is by outing, basically. and it just takes the pitch that's thrown the most. It doesn't even have to be a fastball. So in effect, it would take Griffin Jackson's slider and call it his fastball and define things off of that. The new model would. And so, for example, Matt Whistler's stuff plus actually goes up because his fastball is defined off of his slider. So it's a little tricky. We haven't tested it to know that it's much better. But guys like Graham Ashcraft get better in that model where, he throws a cut fastball as his primary fastball. Matt Whistler got better, and Shohei Ohtani's sinker got better to the point that it's 120 stuff plus. If you haven't been following along, Shohei Ohtani just started throwing. I think he calls it a two-seam. His coaches call it a two-seam. He just started throwing a two-seam. He threw 2 all year, and then his last start he threw 6. So it's a good idea, I think, because his 4-seam is actually, in terms of movement, a little bit in a dead zone. So he might actually get better as a pitcher. Any case, I don't know why I started talking about that.
I don't know, but he got better as a pitcher last year to this year in terms of stuff. He was one of the biggest movers. He was already good last year, and he got better. So
and the other model could say, the other model says he could get better. I'm sorting through young. I'm trying to look at pitchers with high stuff, and then looking over at their command to see if I can spot someone just that way. But it's not really working for me that way. In terms of who has it. I would look for young pitchers coming up that were starters in the minor leagues and that have 3 pitches and can command at least 2 of them. I think that's the magic.
What do you make of DL Hall? We got to see the debut on Saturday. I saw the numbers in the model. The stuff plus number is really good. It's like the best among any lefty I think we've seen in the big leagues this season. It was absurd. The location number was pretty comparable to like Matt Brash. So my mind immediately said, okay, if the floor is filthy left-handed version of Matt Brash, but the ceiling is ridiculous if he could find a way to locate.
Yeah, he has, per the model, an elite slider, an elite curveball, an elite 4-seam fastball, and an elite changeup, basically all by stuff. In terms of what he can command, the locations were only above average on the slider. However, that is an avenue for success. I wonder if, in the minor leagues, you would tell a guy like DL Hall, it's got to be you got to do the 4-seam. You got to get command on the 4-seam. You got to establish the 4-seam. We got to get you practicing the 4-seam. I wonder, sometimes you get to the majors and you see a guy's pitch mix change in the majors, and they feature some pitch they didn't throw as much. I mean, Max Fried added a slider in the majors, and now it's his best pitch. I wonder if DL Hall, if he is actually putting the slider in good locations, could up that slider usage and go 50-50, on the slider 4-seam again, and benefit from that. I will always be interested in a pitcher like this. I acquired shares of DL Hall as soon as I saw him pop in the minor league numbers, but I also fell for Matt Brash. So there is a very high reliever risk here, since curveball aside, he can only command one of his pitches.
I think with Hall,
and it's not a fastball.
So how much do mechanics matter to you? I know with Brash, I remember talking to Keith Law on the Athletic Baseball show, and he said those mechanics are just they're violent and they're problematic. And if you have a location problem that also comes with a complicated or unorthodox delivery, that would be maybe an extra reason from a scouting perspective to be skeptical. I don't know if I've seen anyone point out similar flaws in DL Hall's delivery, or if you saw him, if you had any concerns yourself. But does that matter to you when you're trying to determine how correctable a location issue might be? Because for Brash, I guess you can watch him and say, hey, that looks pretty hard to repeat. Maybe it's always going to be an uphill battle for him to become more consistent in that regard.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I just have to be aware of the limitations of my own knowledge, because I don't actually know that much. I mean, I know some about like some of the ideal mechanics, but it's mostly about velo, about producing velo, and talking about staying back on the back leg and scapular retraction, which means basically putting your shoulder back. So you gain more sort of rubber band action. You gain more velo. I know a little bit about the things that create velo. I don't know a lot about what mechanics lead to good outcomes command wise. But I will say that when I watch DL Hall, I don't think, oh my God, this guy's ridiculous. And yet when I watch Alex Wood, I think this guy's ridiculous. There's no way he could command anything. And I don't think that has been the case for Alex Wood. That I think he's shown fine command.
Yeah, and just looking at Hall's delivery, I don't see anything alarming. That doesn't mean a lot. I am not a mechanics expert. I'm not a scout, but I don't have the red flag, start waving in front of me. Oh, that's not going to work. So I think there's probably more reason to be excited than pessimistic, even though we know this kind of profile can end up being great high leverage reliever if it doesn't work out as a starter. I think the Orioles would be wise to push Hall as a starter for all of next season and probably into 2024 just to see if he can put it all together. I mean, you said four elite pitches by Stuff. How many people in the pool even have 2 elite pitches by Stuff?
Yeah. I mean, you're Spencer Strider.
Yeah, I mean that's rare. So
Yeah. And one thing I would suggest to anybody that is trying to use the model to find future starters that either in the relief pool or just in general, command is very important. And when I looked at various command metrics, I found that command predicted innings pitched per appearance better than Stuff. So if you read between the lines there, command was better at predicting who was a starter or not than Stuff was. And then if you put that next to a finding that I had in my column 2 weeks ago, which found that command disappeared after 80 pitches, that command was actually what fell off first in any given start. I think you understand why, right? Like if you start with bad command and then over the course of your start, it's only going to get worse. And then 80 pitches in, you're going to fall off of that. Then you're just not going to make it through the start. It's just not going to work. So you have to have a high level of command. So in effect, I'd almost, do something where I sorted by location plus in the doc, and then looked for guys that had multiple pitches. So I wonder what that could produce. But again, the team like Keegan Aiken pops this way, right? And maybe it's possible he goes back to starting, but the team he's on has decided he's not. So I don't know how that works for him.
Well, lots of ways we can go from here. We did have a question about Nick Lodolo, and the thrust of the question was kind of how do we rectify a sinker heavy guy that misses bats like Lodolo in an era when that's not as common? Is that a big deal? Does that matter? Is that a limitation on the ceiling for someone like Nick Lodolo? I think when we talked about him maybe a month or so ago, I liked him as a young pitcher to actually get right now, even in redraft leagues, because we weren't going to be worried about innings down the stretch. They could just let him go as a regular starter the rest of the season. And compared to a lot of the young pitchers that we've seen from the early part of the season who've been healthy, we're facing some shutdowns here over the final 6 weeks. So plenty of Ks so far for Lodolo. 11 big league starts, 72 Ks and 54 and 2/3 innings. Ratios are not great. 4.12 ERA is not going to break you, but a 157 whip so far. Last time out, 7 scoreless, 8 Ks against the Phillies, probably the best start of his young career. But what do you make of what we've seen from Lodolo so far, and how does his approach worry you, if it worries you at all?
I'm not. I'm not in love with sinker guys coming up through the minor leagues when I don't have a stuff plus number, and that's just because I assume that it's not going to be that good in my model because sinkers aren't loved by the model and not loved by Major League Baseball. There's the number one pitch that has been going away in baseball is the sinker. Now, that does allow for you to be different, now. And so there are some teams that are making bets on sinkers. I would just say throw the four seam or throw the sinker, whichever one has a better shape. Like don't push it and start like the Royals. They all throw these four seamers, but they're not good because a lot of those guys were drafted as sinker guys. And Lodolo sinker is very good. In fact, in the piece, I laid out that Nick Lodolo and Edward Cabrera were my two favorite guys for. I'm not going to show too much leg. There is a guy who used to be a reliever who is starting now that is also on that list. And you'll have to get the subscription to read the piece. But
you don't wear shorts unless you're exercising, do you?
No, I'm not a never shorts guy. But I just wanted to point out that among sinkers thrown by starters, Nick Lodolo's is second in Stuff Plus. So if you want to do a mental recalibration and say, okay, Eno's model undervalues stuff, and so stuff on sinkers, and so I'll just, if a guy has a 94 sinker, Stuff Plus, then maybe I think that's good enough. I think that's actually an okay way to think about it because Nick Lodolo has the second best Stuff Plus on a sinker thrown by a starter, and it's a 104 Stuff Plus. You might have expected a higher number when I said that. Sandy Alcantara has the number one sinker Stuff Plus among starters. He has a 108 Stuff Plus. So just to kind of compare on four seamers, come on, you can find me a four
seamer. Are you looking for the top numbers on four seamers?
Yeah.
I wish I had those more readily available. I do not.
No, I should have shared it before I started, but I'm right here. It's just I'm having an actual problem. Oh, because it's written with a 4 instead of FOUR. But anyway, the top four seam thrown by a starter is Spencer Strider's with 150. Jeez. 148 Stuff Plus.
But so the ceiling for the stuff model on that pitch is so much higher. Like where really you can go because of the way the model you do have to grade that pitch against other sinkers and not just against the broader universe of fastballs.
So Jordan Montgomery has the third best sinker in our model, 103. Brandon Woodruff is fourth best among starters. Aaron Ashby is fifth best. So that just gives you an idea of who has the best sinkers among starters in baseball. Since Nick Lodolo is already up there, then maybe, Stuff Plus undervalues him overall because it has him with an elite curveball. And if it's really the third best sinker thrown by a starter, then it's really an elite, even though Stuff Plus is not elite, maybe it's an elite sinker. So now you've got two pitches that are elite and the changeup is average. I don't think it's a problem. The only question with Lodolo is command, but I don't think it's such bad command, like compared to DL Hall, right? Like it's,
it's more like DL average Hall command, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe he has some slight ups and downs based on that command, but I think he has less work to do, for example, than Eduardo Cabrera, who, the changeup. Everyone loves the changeup, and it's it's this great pitch that goes 98 miles an hour sometimes, and it looks beautiful when Pitching Ninja throws it up, but the model doesn't love it. It doesn't have good separation from his fastball. And in fact, the model says he should be a sinker slider guy. Now, remember when Sandy Alcantara came up and he was trying to throw the four seam, and I think he just couldn't command it because he's a natural sinker guy, and it wasn't really working. And then he kind of made a change where like the sinker was more of his like go-to pitch and the four seam was more of like an action pitch that he went for swinging strikes with. Once he made that switch, everything clicked. I could see a moment with Eduardo Cabrera where like, oh, I'm going to go more to sinker slider, but I'm still going to have that four-seam changeup, the four-seam fastball and the changeup in my back pocket. That could change everything. I think if he switched over to the sinker as his primary fastball, and then went more sinker slider, because he has, if you look at his like repertoire, he has things that are elite by stuff and things that are better by command. And if you just pick the right pitch mix, I think Edward Cabrera could blow up. Nick Lodolo doesn't have to do anything. He just has to be healthy. So,
yeah,
he's absolutely somebody I would accept in a trade. I don't like to trade for pitchers, but he's absolutely somebody I'd accept in a trade in fantasy. Edward Cabrera is someone I'd hope that I could pick up or as a throw-in a trade or something, because he still has to I think there's something left that he has to do to click. But there is Sandy Alcantara level upside in Edward Cabrera.
Yeah, I think there is elevated injury risk for Cabrera, unfortunately, because he's had multiple arm injuries coming through.
And
the
frankly,
Marlins
he
system.
throws so hard.
But it's interesting that he could end up making those tweaks and really unlock a even higher ceiling than previously expected. In some ways, the way it's going for him right now, the 178 ERA and a 105 WHIP in 6 starts this year. He's been, I think, about as fortunate this year as he was unfortunate last year in 7 starts. The ratios were bad last year, and you look at him and say, okay, he's not that guy. He's probably not quite this
He's not
guy
this guy
either,
unless he makes like a few more tweaks, I think. I mean, the strikeout rate is good, but the walk rate is really high. He can command his sinker better than his four seam. So I think long term he should think about going to that sinker. It's hard to say that about someone who's having so much success right now. And maybe I overshot it by saying throw in, because you never know what kind of recency bias people have, like, oh, I'm going to throw in this guy with a 1 ERA that looks like an amazing starter. Yeah, dude, it's been like, remember last year? But it all depends on the interactions that you have in your league. I wouldn't spend a lot to get Edward Cabrera, because I still see this missing. I would rather have Lodolo.
So looking at Cabrera, I think he's just under 70 innings so far this season between rehab and big league innings and everything. So if he could just stay healthy for the final 6 weeks, he probably gets into the 110, 120 range, which gives him a shot at 150, 160 next year. I don't think you would project him for much more than that anyway, given all the past issues. Like if he were a younger pitcher who was just getting fully stretched out for the first time, maybe you'd worry for slightly different reasons. But I do think he's going to carry that extra injury risk for a while. It's going to take a couple of years for Edward Cabrera to kind of push that
and
far enough into his past where we're not thinking that much about it.
And honestly, Lodolo too, right? I mean, he could get to 100 innings maybe if he's lucky this year, and maybe have 120, 150 next year. But both of those guys are, in redraft leagues, are definitely names that I love. Later in drafts next year, I will definitely have them in my top 75. They'll definitely be in that sort of 70s grouping where I'm like, ooh, I want one of these at the end of my draft.
Yep.
If they rise up a little bit, maybe I'll stick with Lodolo if he rises, if the cost rises. Maybe even Cabrera, but then I'm choosing between them, and it's one or the other depending on who's a little bit cheaper. But generally, it's funny. I make fun of the A's because they acquire these low stuff guys, but in fact, I think we could learn from what they're doing, which is they're acquiring low stuff guys that have a lot of pitches. And I think that's the one thing I would look for breakouts that is undervalued by the community, because now stuff numbers are becoming more ubiquitous. And now anytime you're trading with somebody who's in the know, there's a couple of stuff models out there. They can check out the stuff model and they can say, no, I don't want that low stuff, that allows for some arbitrage. That allows for some, I don't know if I'm not going to go as far as say that, go get you some JP Sears, shares, but you can use that philosophy when you're looking. That's what I was sort of trying to get at when I was talking about Mitch White. It doesn't look great. The stuff plus is not high, but there are a lot of pitches there.
Yeah, no, Dane Dunning's got 4 pitches. You want some Dane Dunning?
So yeah, see, you got to be careful.
It does seem like you could torch yourself pretty good. Like 89.4 on the fastball might be enough of a. Yeah, thanks. I'm glad you got
Dane
3 of the
Dunning's throwing
pitches.
these days?
Yeah.
Oh, rough.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not what you're looking for. Let's talk about the next crop of elite relievers for a bit. We talked about the expected continuation of the closer tax, I think maybe 2 or 3 episodes ago, and I started thinking about one of my keeper leagues where the year that he became the closer in Cleveland, it wasn't clear because of James Karinchak that Emmanuel Clase was going to have the job, and I got him for I think $4 in the auction. So he's been a great keeper for a few years, probably even an extension guy in that league. The way things are going, strikeout rate's a little bit low right now for Clase, given how good the stuff actually is. But it got me thinking about finding the next elite closers or trying to find the next elite closers. Maybe if you speculate on Ryan Helsley this year in a keeper league, you're feeling really good about your future at this point. Is Felix Bautista just sort of the obvious guy right now? Maybe it's not even fair to point him out because he's come up a few times over the course of this season, and now with Jorge Lopez being traded a few weeks ago, it's very easy to see the intention to use him as a regular closing option in Baltimore.
Yeah, but I think it's still worth talking about him because he represents, I think, the best way to look for them, which is through the lens of Stuff Plus. I mean, we know that Pitching Plus is very strong and even stronger, actually, with relievers than with starters because you're dealing in small samples. And we know that Stuff Plus is stickier year to year. So they're hewing closer to Stuff Plus, I think, gets you where you need to go. I like guys like Jason Adam. I think he could push his way to the front there in Tampa. I like Joe Barlow still. I think he's going to get the job back. I don't know if these are elite guys, but they're definitely guys that have good stuff plus and opportunity. I picked up Pete Fairbanks. I picked up Sir Anthony Dominguez. In fact, I think he's sort of what you're talking about because they picked up other guys. He's not going to end up with the most saves on the Phillies this year. He's going to have the most saves on the Phillies next year.
Yeah, as things are currently lined up, I mean, they could always be the team that goes back to the well in free agency, and maybe Kenley Jansen ends up going to the Phillies for a year or something like that. But Knebel was there on a 1-year deal. Robertson was acquired as someone on a 1-year deal who'll be back in free agency again. So I think that makes sense. It seems like a good spot to possibly target someone. I think with the Rays, we always have these assumptions that they will use a committee forever. They don't have to use a committee forever, or they could at least anoint one person as sort of the head of the committee, someone that could get 20 plus saves with great ratios and Ks. So I could see that being a path for Adam. And I'm looking at the K minus BB percentage leaderboard too, just among pitchers with 40 or more innings. And you can see Adams up there at 26.6%, right there. Felix Bautista, 26.5%. Bednar's in that range. So not a surprise to see him there, since he would have been popping in this sort of conversation this time a year ago. Andres Munoz is still really interesting to me because I think we look at Seattle, and I think we both like Paul Sewald. There's no reason why Paul Sewald can't be an elite closer, but Munoz might be someone that's a little overlooked right now because of the depth that they have in that Seattle pen. We're now looking at almost 50 innings this season with a 40% K rate. Doesn't walk a lot of guys. A 7% walk rate is great, missing that many bats. So, I mean, what do you think about Andres Munoz maybe as someone that you want to start stashing away now in keeper leagues, and is someone that would make a lot of sense as we look ahead to draft and hold season and start thinking about 2023 a bit?
100%. 100%. Huge stuff. And not just the four seamer, but definitely also the four seamer. And I could see them trading Paul Sewald, honestly. Like that's Trader Joe over there. Trader Jerry, sorry. And so I think Munoz is a guy that you want to buy. Here's an interesting name that actually we should have talked about earlier. Juan Duran absolutely has the command and the number of pitches to be a starter. And so that's an interesting guy to maybe target even in a trade, even though if you're buying a little high, you might be buying a starter next year, you might be buying their closer next year. Either way, it seems like he has an impact arm. And so I think you're kind of covered either way.
I do like that when you have the possible gets you saves or is going to be a good starter. And I
Like
say
that
that as
was where
someone.
Strider was going, and I think that's where Brash is going. Like Brash could eventually be the closer there too in Seattle.
I guess that's the one thing working against Munoz. It's not just one other option. It's
They're
like
so
3 or
good.
4. Even
Yeah.
Eric Swanson is having a
Has been
great
really
year.
popping in the model. He's a lot better. Eric Swanson is also why I tend to actually look the other way. And it's because I also have leagues where I can benefit from having a closer in my starting pitcher spot. I'm always looking for in spring training for guys that are going from starting to relieving, because Eric Swanson was not a very good starter, and he's been a I have to say, really good reliever. So, sometimes you don't even need your fancy model to be like, hey, this guy was a starter and is now going to be a reliever this year. I'm gonna put some money on that.
Yeah, I guess that's where like the Eli Morgan name comes back into the conversation too. Like I wasn't really excited about him as a back end starter in Cleveland, but he's been excellent for them out of the pen. Like 7 strikeouts to every walk. It's just phenomenal to have a guy like that working as part of the bridge to the 9th inning. Any other reliever names that really stand out to you for one reason or another? I think Brian Abreu always intrigues me. I think I've mentioned
You
him
love him.
I've mentioned him on this show a handful of times. I think he's been a prospect of the week selection. He'd be among the guys that I would look at and say, reliever now that could be a starter later. And I think it's because I've seen Houston do this a few times, right? This is not necessarily an organization that takes that.
Yeah, Javier's
You're a
gone back
reliever
and
now.
forth. Yeah.
Javier's done it. I think Luis Garcia broke in as a reliever very briefly before starting, if I remember correctly. They've done this a couple of times already, and I think that is a profile that I'd want to take a chance on in deeper leagues and just kind of see, what actually happens with his role going into next season.
Yeah, I like Robert Suarez. I know he's got Josh Hader there, but if things fall apart in San Diego, I think Preller is on more of the hot seat than you might expect. In fact, there could be a quick rebuild there if things go really poorly. So you never know where Robert Suarez ends up. And I don't even know what kind of a deal it was.
I thought his contract was a short, like
might be a 1-year deal.
1 year. Yeah.
So anyway, he might enter the market as a possible closer. I don't know if a contender would necessarily. It's a 2-year, $11 million deal, but it's a 2023 player option.
Yeah, so he could go back out into the market.
Yeah, if he thinks he's done enough. Robert Suarez does have big stuff. And then just to your point earlier about the Seattle having Festa actually pops
Another guy.
Yeah, and former starter too, right? But Jorge Alcala, when he comes back, that could be a thing where Jorge Alcala is healthy and they make him the closer and they try to make Duran a starter next year in Minnesota. Ryan Pepio is an interesting guy because the command is so bad in this model and also just by eye test that he could be a future reliever. And I don't know, considering how many years of control they have and what kind of a team they are, I think his journey towards being a reliever might be a long one. So he might be a guy who's like a long guy next year or something. But I actually remain a little bit pessimistic about him being a major league starter, despite how good the stuff looks. It's that low, like 91 location plus is really low, So, and for what it's worth, there's not really any other starters that have it that low.
Yeah, I think because the Dodgers do such a good job of finding relievers off the scrap heap, either injured players or guys that stuck in other organizations that they can tweak. That kind of affords them the luxury of not forcing it with Pepio. They can say, "Hey, we want to see if you can make it to the start," or we like having 8, 9, 10 guys stretched out that we trust with major league caliber stuff. Go back to AAA again. He's still got options for a few years, so
yeah,
they can
he might be up and
really
down for a while for sure. Jonathan Hernandez, if Joe Barlow doesn't make it happen, Jonathan Hernandez in Texas could be the next starter, the next closer there. Spores also looks pretty good in the model, so they've got a couple guys there. It seems like they have nobody, but they're definitely have some guys.
Hernandez has made it tough to wait it out with Barlow. If you're in a mixed league for a keeper league, if you're AL only, I think it's a little easier to just wait on that next option, that second reliever,
Well,
because
it was going to be Brett Martin, but it wasn't Brett Martin.
that was fab money poorly spent. It could have been worse. I mean, I think it was a pretty small bid for the most part that it took to get Brett Martin. But yeah, I was thinking about a couple other guys that have changed roles or will change roles recently. What do you think about Yusei Kikuchi getting out of the rotation? It seems like the Jays are at the point now where they're trying to find some other way to use him, and I think we've probably seen enough of him as a starter to support that. I mean, we're talking about 448 innings now since he joined the Mariners back in 2019, an ERA just above 5, a WHIP at 142.
Yeah. To put Pepio in context, you say Kikuchi's location plus is 94.
That's a really bad sign for Ryan Pepio.
Yeah. So, here's another guy with location plus at 91, Carlos Hernandez.
Okay, also not a starter, unfortunately, at least it appears.
Super wild. I think this is a great move for them in the postseason, because when I look at that team, I think that Kikuchi could actually be a real wild card for them in the postseason, because it's just more likely that you can get more innings per appearance due to command from guys like even Stripling, maybe even a White. But in the postseason, you don't need to worry about White. So you're not even going to start him. So you become a Barrios, Gossman, Manoah team where Stripling is your long guy, or if you're in a 7-game series, Stripling might start your 4th game. But Kikuchi can come in. If Barrios is bad Barrios, Kikuchi can come in the second.
It's a different look.
Before Barrios gives up 5, right? If Barrios is on his way to giving up 5, he gives up 2. You put in Kikuchi in the second or third, you keep it at 2, and you stay in the game because it's the postseason. So I think it's a move with an eye towards the postseason. I think it's a great one, because Kikuchi also gives them a look that none of their other guys give them. Powered lefty that can go multiple innings.
So I thought it would work out a little better for him in Toronto. I thought they could take the best parts of Kikuchi and make it work as a starter. So maybe they'll give it one more shot at the beginning of next season. It's a 3-year deal that he's on right now. But if you can turn him into a good multi-inning reliever who is good for 2 or 3 innings at a time, or possibly a high leverage guy at some point, that's also worth $12 million a year. Like, that's if could Kikuchi be kind of like the Drew Pomerantz of a few years ago?
So. I think so. Although the one thing is, I'm not sure how much more velo he has, because he is kind of a guy who throws really close to his max velo. So I don't think he's going to jump up to necessarily 97, 98 all the time.
I think it's maybe 1 tick instead of 2 or 3.
Right. And that's something that maybe teams have a better sense on than we do in the public, because, I haven't really found the if anybody wants to research this, why do some relievers get more velocity when they go to the pen than others? I think it has something to do with maximum, but I haven't actually seen that research done. And the average is like a tick and a half, but some guys get way more. What I'll say is Kikuchi maxes out right now as a starter at 96.9. That's where he is right now. And he's sitting at 95. So, yeah, what's left? Maybe he can get to 95.5. Maybe he could get to 96, but he can't. He's not going to go past 97. He's maxing at 97. So I don't think he has a lot more velo in there, but we may see more slider velo, and then just he won't have the opportunity to blow up the way he does. Yeah. So I and then also, he doesn't command that cutter that well. So, just focusing on fewer pitches that he can command better could also make him a much better pitcher. So I just like it generally, because I think it's smart for them for the postseason to have a guy who can go 2 or 3 innings, be a lefty, and come in the second or third inning. I mean, we just seen that happen with even some of the really good starters have gone out early in the postseason.
That happens. Facing the best lineup, have a slightly off day, and you get crushed for it. It's just the way postseason baseball works. But I'd love to see it for Kikuchi. It'd be nice to see him in a role that makes him a lot more effective because he can be really fun when things are clicking for him, and those shorter outings might be a path to make that happen. And it doesn't mean he's a reliever next year. It just means for the rest of this season they can get something out of him and they can try and fix it.
Does mean I'm not as excited for him as a sleeper next year because you can only tap that button so many times.
Yeah. Speaking of buttons, did you see? Have you ever seen the floor mats that you get for dogs that allow them to communicate with you? Like each button has a pre-recorded voice that says something, so then they can tell you outside, chicken, play ball. You've seen anyone use these before?
No.
They're pretty amazing. You should check that out. I don't. I'm trying to decide if I want my dog to be able to tell me more things than she already does with the other.
Or will it just be the same thing every time? Chicken.
Or
Chicken.
I think it would just be the
Chicken.
chicken button on repeat. Fetch,
Bacon. I want
fetch,
the bacon.
bark. Like it's like, peanut butter. Like she just peanut butter,
Okay, enough of
cheese,
that. Let's
chicken.
put it away.
Yeah. So I'm like intrigued by it, but also a little bit afraid of it. But hitting the button too many times, I just think of that. Like I'm pretty sure that's what Hazel would do. She would just hit the chicken button all day until we finally caved and just let her have an entire chicken all to herself. That is going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. You can find us on Twitter. Eno's at Enosaurus. I am at Derek Van Riper. If you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to hit the like button on this video. Subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. And if you have a moment, leave us a nice rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify if you're listening on one of those platforms. Schedule's going to be a little different next week. We'll still have 2 episodes, but it won't be Monday, Thursday. It'll probably be something like a Wednesday, Friday combo. We're still working out the details of that. Fortunately for me, I get some time off, so I'm looking forward to that. Hope everybody has a great weekend. We are back with you next week.
Thanks for listening.